Does the law of armed conflict apply to non-state armed groups? Recent events have brought the question of whether the law of armed conflict applies to non-state armed groups into sharp focus. As conflicts around the world evolve, many are asking how international humanitarian law applies to these groups. Understanding this topic is essential for anyone interested in the current state of global conflicts and humanitarian efforts. The law of armed conflict, which includes the Geneva Conventions and customary international humanitarian law, does indeed apply to non-state armed groups under specific conditions. The key principle is that all parties involved in an armed conflict must respect international humanitarian law. This obligation extends to protecting civilians and those who are no longer participating in hostilities. Common Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions explicitly addresses non-international armed conflicts. These conflicts often involve non-state armed groups battling state forces or each other. This article sets minimum standards for humane treatment and prohibits acts such as violence against civilians, torture, and hostage-taking. Therefore, non-state armed groups engaged in these conflicts are legally required to follow these rules. In recent years, some non-state armed groups have entered into agreements that commit them to uphold human rights and international humanitarian law. For instance, the National Democratic Front of the Philippines has pledged to protect a wide range of human rights under a peace agreement. Similarly, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement has recognized its obligations under customary human rights law in areas it controls. These agreements highlight that non-state armed groups can be bound by legal and moral obligations to protect civilians and adhere to humanitarian norms. While the Geneva Conventions primarily focus on state parties, the evolving interpretation of international humanitarian law increasingly acknowledges the responsibilities of non-state armed groups. However, enforcing these obligations can be challenging due to issues of control and accountability. The political context can complicate the situation further. Despite these challenges, the legal framework clearly establishes that the protections of international humanitarian law extend to conflicts involving non-state armed groups. The ultimate goal is to limit suffering and safeguard civilians during armed conflicts, making this topic increasingly relevant in today's world.